Ibrahim Olabi joins us now. Ibrahim is a lawyer at Guernica 37 Chambers here in London. Ibrahim, thanks so much for your time. First of all, just give us your overall reaction to the verdict, the sentencing. How important is this precedent?
Thank you for having me. Good evening. It's a very important step and it's an important precedent, not just because it deals with a specific person who has victims and who were present in court and who've given evidence. It's not just about Anwar and his direct victims, but it's also about the wider strategic impact of this case. For the very first time in front of an independent court that is highly regarded across the world, the judgment which was delivered today over, witnesses told me, over longer than 3 hours, outlined in detail how torture is systematic and widespread. This was not about an isolated incident of war crimes. Anwar was charged with crimes against humanity, and these crimes in their very nature involve a wider state apparatus. So while the Syrian regime is not a party on paper to this case, it is directly affected by it as it paints a picture of the kind of systematic torture that Anwar was part of, but not the only person that is responsible. So it's a very important step for the victims of Anwar and those who were tortured and lost their lives in the branch of which he led, but it's also a wider step for strategic litigation in the Syrian case.
Can you tell us more about on what basis the court was able to conduct this prosecution? Was it applying international law? Would a German citizen have had to been involved in the torture and the killings that Anwar Raslan was found guilty of?
Well, these crimes and the crimes that that Anwar was found guilty of were recognized by many states as crimes that belong to the international community as a whole. They're customary in nature, and so a lot of countries, particularly Western countries, took upon themselves to integrate those crimes into their domestic legislation, regardless of where the crime took place. Now, some countries have stricter rules than others. They require a perpetrator, they require someone from the nationality, as you mentioned, or they require the victim to be present. And in varying degrees, they legislate for this kind of jurisdiction within their domestic kind of legislation. So the principle is called universal jurisdiction, and basically these crimes are so grave in nature that the countries took upon themselves to say, we will not allow people who have committed those crimes to be welcomed in our country, and if they do come, we will hold them to account. So it's due to the gravity of the crimes that then were translated into these domestic jurisdictions. But it's important to say that any country in the world has the right to exercise universal jurisdiction. Whether they created the legal framework for it or not is a different story. But under international law, you are allowed as a state to hold perpetrators accountable. It's not just allowed, sometimes even encouraged, and you should, and you have a positive obligation to do so. And Germany took upon itself to do so in the case of Anwar and Iyad.
Can there be more such prosecutions while those suspected of carrying out such crimes remain in Syria, or would the suspects have to leave Syrian territory?
Well, a prosecution like this has many elements and has many stages. So there are 3 high-ranking individuals in Syria, including Ali Mamlouk and Jamil Hassan, who had military intelligence and intelligence for the Syrian army, who have arrest warrants against them. So if they would, step foot into Europe or any country that has an extradition kind of treaty with Germany, they will be held to account. So those who are outside of Syria could potentially face arrest warrants, and these arrest warrants could, translate into Interpol red notices. They could, add a lot of pressure and really make it difficult for these individuals to travel around. Or if they were found in Syria, in Europe, or in any country that applies these principles, and the police take action, which we hope that they would, they can be held into account. But it definitely sets a very good precedent in the legal sense, but also in the persuasiveness sense of it. Not a binding precedent, but a persuasive precedent for other war crimes units, for other international initiatives to say, look, a German court already in a very detailed judgment in the hundreds of pages has said Syria is committing systematic torture. So let's build upon that and look for those even more responsible than Anwar was.
Ibrahim, thank you so much for that. Really, really interesting to hear the legal analysis of what's happened in that court in Germany. Ibrahim Olabi from Guernica 37 Chambers.